Peace and love, you magnificent miracles with a spiritual level of being. Nathan here from the spiritual level of being, and today we're going to share some knowledge, that of the Gnostic persecution, the witch hunting. Now, the death toll of these witches being burnt alive, many of which were women, many of which were Gnostics, is in the death toll of the millions to billions. In 1484 to 1750, 200,000 people were killed, only 110,000 of which, just slightly over half, were actually trialed. The rest were killed with no trial, usually publicly humiliated, tortured to give a false confession. Some were raped, which were the women. Some were executed, then had their bodies burnt. Some were burnt alive, as they seen burning as an act of purification. Now, early Christianity was against the idea of witches. Later on, during the power of the Catholic and Orthodox Church, its emergence, they would use witches as a way of gaining control to spread fear, as witch hunting grew out of fear. Now, Pope Innocent VIII said that torture was necessary and accepted for confession. Pope Gregory XI said that demons are responsible for all magic in the world. Now, these witches were executed in various different ways, horrible events. Now, in one case, the early Catholic Church gave an apology to the families of which were victims of, or had their families being victims of being accused of witches and being killed. So they even gave some of these families compensation. Now, it was simply punishable by death. You were called a witch, even for simply healing someone. The Gnostics would secretly heal those for free. Some cases, for people that were dying, they would also practice euthanasia. Now, if the Gnostic was caught with this spiritual sanctum, which was euthanasia, the last baptism in a sense, they were declared as witch, they were burnt alive, and usually the person that was dying anyway would also be tortured and killed. Now, witches were simply called witches because they had a different belief of Christianity, they had a different belief in general. Sometimes people just simply pointed their finger at someone and blamed them for their troubles in their own life or for catastrophes. And this poor person was then put on trial and usually tortured, executed, publicly humiliated. Now, the use of witch hunting grew popular as the payments would increase. Anyone who challenged the church hierarchy were put to death. To simply be able to read the Bible was seen as blasphemous. You were declared a heretic. If you translated the Bible into your native tongue, you were also declared a heretic and you were killed. Now, the Gnostics were hated because they knew the truth. They were about encouraging art, philosophy, maths, equality. If the Gnostics survived as the main branch of Christianity, we would advance a lot quicker. We would have a much kinder world. We'd be more advanced. We'd be much more spiritual. You see, today's mainstream Christianity is responsible for holding us back. Aramaic faiths are bad for this. Judaism, today's Christianity, and even Islam. They all say Islam at least researched into medicine, which usually was taken from the mystics or Gnostics. The earliest Christians were the Gnostics and the Essenes, which were the ones that were actually being persecuted by the Romans. The Catholics and Orthodox were persecuting these early Christians, and they simply just swapped the story around and made it look like they were the ones being persecuted, when in fact they were the ones actually doing the persecution. Now, there are many branches of Christianity, and they were declared as heretics. They were killed, and they didn't call themselves heretics, they just seen themselves as Christians. Many of which were much more peaceful, especially the Gnostics. They were a peaceful community, strictly non-violence. They were vegetarian. They didn't like taking any life. Some were pescatarian. The ones that were pescatarian believed that fish simply multiplied. They didn't reproduce through sex, so they didn't see them as eating a soul. Now, the Gnostics were big on equality, whether you're a male or female. They were big on learning. Now, one reason why the Catholic Church were killing Gnostics for simply healing people was because they wanted to make it that their priest were the doctors, so you had to pay a priest to heal you. You had to pay a priest to teach your child how to read and write. Maybe they were sent off to a monastery, or you had to be well off. They didn't want the poor people educated, which the Gnostics were happy to do. They were happy to spread education, ideas, free thought, free thinking. The Catholic Church and the early Orthodox Church hated this. The Orthodox Church later stopped using heresy hunting, and the Catholic Church would continue this practice all the way up to like 1750 to 18th century, which is horrible. So they've killed billions and millions. So they burnt many of these writings. Many of these writings belong to the Gnostics, even some Essenes. We don't have many Essene writings left. They're more just references by early day church fathers and heresy hunters. Many of the early day church fathers were also witch hunters, heresy hunters, such as Saint Irenaeus, who was also present during the Council of Nicaea. There were 11 different councils choosing what was canon, and anything that wasn't canon was declared heretic or blasphemous. And anyone who challenged this idea was put to death, was labelled a criminal, or, if they were lucky, exiled. Now, when the Romans exiled the Jews from Jerusalem, they didn't just exile Jews, they also exiled a bunch of Christians, many of which fled to Egypt, which were Gnostic Christians, as they seen the Romans as corrupt, material rulers. So they challenged the hierarchy of the time. They disagreed with it. They seen the world needed equality, love, compassion, to be like Christ themselves. And this was seen as taboo by the Catholic and Orthodox Church, which had many adaptations of Roman faiths and different beliefs mixed into the Bible. They changed many holy dates to different dates. They used Sunday as a sun god day, changed it to Christianity. Christians now go to church on Sunday. They used to have the Sabbath. Now, the virgin birth story was also added in. Before that, it was adoptionism, or that the belief was all souls were born of a virgin, but the flesh came from sex. So the Gnostics seen things as symbolic, deeper meanings, understanding these mysteries, searching for knowledge. You didn't need to go see a priest to go confess your sins, so you didn't need to pay a priest. Again, this gained the wrath of the Catholic Church, which was about money and control. So they killed these early groups of Christianity to make themselves the supreme. They called themselves Catholics or Orthodox, which means universal, correct, right. So the correct ones or right ones. And they were hardly universal and they're hardly correct or right. They were very, very evil in their early beginnings. And they still do questionable acts. Orthodox is a lot more better than Catholicism. I'm referring to the Vatican issues here. Now, the Gnostics and the Essenes were the Christians that were actually being persecuted. The Catholics and the Orthodox simply just took that role for themselves, when in fact, they were not persecuted. They come much later. Orthodox being a bit older than Catholicism being the true successor of the Roman Church, as it was seen as it had a male heir, where the Greek Orthodox at the time had a female empress, and they disliked this idea, as King Charlemagne was a male and was a supporter of the popes. These popes are in turn what caused these heresy huntings to begin with. So we must be more self-aware. When we become more aware, more loving compassion, we don't do these shitty acts out of ignorance or fear. We've come a long way. And it is great to see Gnosticism returning, not being driven underground anymore. As Gnosticism returns, so do good men and women. There was a prophecy told by the last Cathar teacher, bishop, who was burnt alive at stake. He said, the 600 years, which is in our time, good men and women will return to the earth and the old scriptures will be found again. This prophecy has come true. They found the Nag Hammadi library. Gnostics are returning. And with this, free thought, free thinking. When religion loses its power, we in turn start being more compassionate, more loving. As religion and politics don't mix, it was never meant to be joined. It was meant to be an idea of a spiritual faith. Then it would become politically motivated, become dogma and religion. So religion was made to control the people. Where before this, we were spiritual. We worshipped Mother Earth. We worshipped the universe. We appreciated our place in the earth. Some would have seen all life as God itself, living this cosmic experience, depending on the age and location, beliefs. So peace and love, everyone. I love you all. Connect to one mind and soul. Namaste.